I just returned from 3 weeks in Japan. It was my first ever trip over there, and it's a trip I've wanted to go on for years. Well over a decade now, really. In a perfect world, I already went on this trip back in 2012, and probably numerous more times after that. But in spite of being so late to realize this dream of mine, I'm still very, very happy with how it all turned out. It was a dream come true. There's obviously some concern about putting a foreign country on too high of a pedestal and going there only to be disappointed. So I didn't want to put myself or Japan in that situation, but now that it's over, I can safely say that there was no concern at all that Japan would not live up to my expectations, because despite them being already pretty high, the country still managed to surpass them. And while, yes, the primary reason I went there is because I am a giant weeb, shocker I know, Japan didn't just enthrall me with its video games, anime, and VTubers, it also took my breath away with its art and views, it electrified my taste buds with delicious food, and it opened my mind with its abundance of people to just watch. That's an aspect of this trip I didn't anticipate enjoying so much. People watching. There's places scattered around Tokyo and Osaka, the two cities I visited, where you can just plant yourself down with a water bottle and just hang out, watching dozens or even hundreds of people walk through the area every minute. I expected to be out and about non-stop for, 12 hours a day, but I quickly learned to appreciate the act of just chilling out and taking it all in. Let me take a step back and start from the beginning here, because I didn't actually start this year with the intention of going to Japan. It was honestly a pretty sudden decision. Checking my old messages in my Discord server that I have with my friends, I was still considering the idea of going back in late May. So if I did settle on the decision, I'd say it was in June, and I spent the months leading up to my vacation doing as much research and preparation as I could. Early on, I set up a criteria for myself to make sure I truly have an enjoyable time. Now first, I wanted to check out at least 2 cities, because I don't want to be cooped up only in Tokyo. I could easily visit Nagoya, Kyoto, and Osaka via bullet train or Shinkansen, so after some thought, I decided to add Osaka. Second, I wanted to stay in Japan for a bare minimum of 2 weeks, to ensure that I stayed for long enough in both cities to actually develop some semblance of familiarity with them. Obviously, Tokyo and Osaka are big, especially the former, so I'm never actually going to learn to memorize every little detail about them in just 2 weeks. But I didn't want to do a short hit-and-run vacation where I only have time to hit up the most obvious and popular spots, then pack up and move on. I wanted to stay long enough to allow myself time to slow down and appreciate the minutiae of each city, or at the very least, the places that I explored. I wanted to give myself time to just look around and check out places I did not jot down on my list. I didn't want to end this vacation plagued by thoughts of, what if I did this, or I should have done that. I wanted to stay long enough that by the time I left, I could look at this huge list of places to check out and be fine with leaving whatever remains for a future revisit. That's all. So my final plans ended up being 3 weeks, 1 in Tokyo, 1 in Osaka, and 1 in Tokyo again, so I'd be going back and forth. Now in case you're wondering, this does mean that I did not have any sort of concrete itinerary for this trip, except for one specific event that I bought tickets for only a few days before flying over there. Beyond that, I only had my list and my own desire to check out or not check out whatever was on it that day. Basically, it was a vibes-based vacation. I know some people will watch this video or future videos that I have planned covering this trip and look at everything I did and say, I can't believe you didn't do this, or how could you go to Japan and not do that? Well, the answer is simple. I just didn't want to. Or maybe it just never crossed my mind the entire time I was there. This is my vacation, and I went without any hard itinerary to follow, and that's on purpose. I don't want obligations during a vacation, because obligations bring stress, and stress is the last thing you should be feeling on a vacation. I just had a list of potential places to go, and beyond that, I went wherever my feet took me. And I know some people are going to ask, so I'll give you the answer. I had about 120 total places and activities jotted down across both cities, and I would say I accomplished about 70 of them or so. This includes every unique location except revisits, of course, and rail stations, because those are pretty much a given. Before we fully dive into my experience over there, I do want to give some context as to my experience with traveling in general and with big cities. I've mentioned this before in past videos, but I'm actually a country person. I've spent my entire life living in the American Southwest, in the desert, with my home specifically being a 20-minute drive from the nearest town. In fact, I have to drive to my own mailbox. That's how rural I am. I have flown before, and I have visited big cities before, such as Chicago, but that trip was to visit a friend and attend an event, Combo Breaker, and I didn't actually do any solo exploring there. I just hung out with my friend, who took me to some great places, and then we went to Combo Breaker, and then I returned home. It was pretty straightforward. Tokyo was the first time I was ever truly off the leash and on my own when going to another city. And for a country guy like me, that's a serious trial by fire. To go from my home, where there's nothing for miles around, to one of the biggest and densest cities in the world, it's like a person who has never eaten spicy food before suddenly biting down on a Carolina Reaper. And on top of all that, I've never been further away from home than Chicago. And the only other country I've been to is Mexico, because it's just a stone's throw away from my house. If I wanted to, I could make a trip over there and come back in a single afternoon. Now, the flight, or series of flights, to Tokyo was a task in itself, simply because that last flight was a whopping 12 hours long. I watched the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy, theatrical cut because extended wasn't available, on that flight, and I still had 3 hours left when it was finished. It was something. Thankfully, I wasn't too exhausted because I started my series of flights right after I woke up in the morning, so I wasn't fighting to sleep out of necessity. Furthermore, layovers were practically non-existent for me. Technically, they were an hour long each, but that just means when you land and finally make your way to the connecting flight, they're about to begin boarding in 10 minutes anyway. So I finally land in Haneda Airport, which is a decision I very purposely made over Narita Airport because after a 12-hour flight, I was not interested in an extra hour-long car or train ride on top of that, which is something you have to keep in mind when choosing to land in either Haneda or Narita. Now personally, I noticed some tickets heading for Narita were a little bit cheaper, but I wanted my traveling to be over as soon as possible, so I picked Haneda. After going through customs, I followed what I learned in various videos and immediately withdrew 10,000 yen from a nearby 7-bank ATM. But I was in such a hurry that I foolishly forgot to try and get a welcome Suica card while at the terminal. For those who don't know, IC cards like Tokyo's Suica or Osaka's Ikoka cards are the ultimate convenience. You fill them with money, which takes only seconds, then use them for tap payments to cover metro and railway costs, bus rides, and even convenience store purchases. It's the ultimate tool for a culture where seemingly everyone is in a hurry. So I recommend getting one and hopefully not forgetting like I did. So I got a single ticket for the KQ airport line, not sure why this process didn't instantly remind me to get my Suica card, but maybe that's just my ADHD brain. And for the first time, I got on a Tokyo Metro train. It's such a small thing, stepping onto the metro and riding it to the next stop, and it's not even my first time doing it. I rode the Chicago L while I was there, but riding a Tokyo train really cemented the fact in my head that I'm in another country halfway around the world. I've seen movies, shows, anime, and other YouTube channels of people riding the metro, sometimes hyper cramped, and it's kinda weird to finally be doing it myself, even if it's such a mundane task. And speaking of cramped, let me tell you, it does get really fucking cramped. I've had the displeasure of getting on board during both peak morning and afternoon hours, and it's not fun being shoulder to shoulder to such an extent that you can't even raise your arms above your head without elbowing someone. Thankfully, the metro is so reliable and convenient that they run trains closer together during high congestion. So instead of waiting 3 minutes between trains, you only wait about 1. So if you're not in a hurry and you can afford to just let everyone else deal with the hustle and bustle, you can just sit around and chill on the platform for about 10 minutes or so as activity dies down a bit. Now this leads me to my first and thankfully only really embarrassing blunder of the trip. Being inexperienced with rapid transit in general, but also being in a foreign country placed on top of that, I knew I had to be careful to make sure I didn't go in the wrong direction or anything. Unfortunately, when I landed and left the airport, I was caught up in the storm of people heading home for the day. Students leaving school and adults leaving work. The aforementioned hustle and bustle was reaching a peak, and it swept me up and got me in a bit of a panic. The result was me going in the correct direction for my first stop, but then I accidentally transferred over to the wrong line and I was going back in the opposite direction. Once I noticed that, I decided to say fuck it and just get a taxi, which took me directly to my hotel. The next day though, I was able to take a minute to actually read the signs and find out where I'm supposed to go. Now this leads me to my next piece of advice for anyone going. Use Google Maps. I've found that Google Maps is actually super accurate when it comes to not only where the nearest station is, but also the most efficient line to take to your destination, which platform it's on, when the next train departs, which line to transfer to if necessary, which car to ride so you can exit faster, and which exit to take when you leave the destination station for the most efficient route to wherever it is you're going. Seriously, Google Maps was a very important tool for me while I was there, and it was accurate 99% of the time. Only once or twice did it recommend me routes that weren't totally efficient and I had to make my own changes. Another thing to keep in mind, there's 3 major rapid transit systems you will likely end up using while in Tokyo, and they are Tokyo Metro, Toei Subway, and JR East. You might also take the Rinkai Line or Yurikamome, which are what connect the artificial islands of Aomi and Odaiba. For example, if you plan on visiting the life-size Unicorn Gundam or the Diver City Mall right behind it, you're going to take either the Rinkai Line or Yurikamome, and the latter is fully automated, having no conductors at all. Going back to taxis for a bit though, I will say that if you want to stay at least somewhat frugal for your own trip to Japan, only use taxis if you really need to. They quickly become expensive because they charge per 100 meters driven. That ride to my hotel the evening I landed, that was a 29-kilometer ride and cost me almost 12,000 yen. The same distance would have been covered by the railway for probably less than 1,000. So basically, if I had just stayed calm and took like 10 minutes to reevaluate things, I probably would have saved myself like $65. So only get taxis for somewhat short distances, and only if you're in a position where you cannot feasibly walk to the nearest metro station. Now that being said, you should still be prepared to get a taxi in case you need it. So before you actually go on your trip, download the Go Taxi app and put your information in. That's what I used, and it worked flawlessly the 3 times I used it. All 3 drivers were very skilled and got me to my destination smoothly. Typically, drivers in Japan are pretty patient and considerate, and traffic is quite predictable. If you're considering getting an international driver's license so you can rent a car while over there, I would say there's nothing to really worry about so long as you know the basics of driving in Japan. The only thing to keep in mind is that there's a lot of pedestrian and bike traffic, and highway interchanges might be a little weird, so you'll probably want to do some research on it. Speaking of research, something you can look up really quickly is my merch store. As of right now, I have 2 shirt designs, a sliced skull and a tribute to Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. I also have a beanie with my logo embroidered on it, great for the cold weather. Both shirt designs are available in lightweight fabric and heavyweight cotton. I've already received samples of everything for quality checking, and I can confirm they look great in person. If you're interested, visit mildconviction.com or check the store tab of my YouTube channel page. Thanks for listening, now let's get back to the video. Moving on, my first full day was, of course, in Akihabara, where I obviously spent my time being a shameless weeb, looking at weeb shit. Arcades, retro game stores, anime, gunpla, VTubers, trading card games, and even Warhammer. If you name a nerdy hobby, Akiba will indulge you. But I'm not going to go deep into my Akiba adventure just yet. I'm saving that for a separate video where I'll go into detail, plus talk about my time in Denden Town, which is basically Osaka's Akiba equivalent. So keep an eye open for that. The second day in Tokyo was spent in Ginza, which is one of the most luxurious and expensive city districts not only in Japan, but the entire world. As you might imagine, I didn't spend a lot of money there, but I did visit the Uniqlo and Muji flagship stores. The third day in Tokyo, I went to Ueno, where I checked out the park and zoo. It was thankfully a pleasant day because my time in Akiba 2 days prior was drenched by constant drizzle that lasted until nightfall. No such problem while in Ueno Park though. It was a great day to spend time looking at animals and chilling in nature. The same day, I decided to hit up Shibuya, and you know that means checking out the famous Shibuya Scramble Crossing, and it's just as crazy as it seems. It's still daytime, so it's not even peak scramble hours. I revisited the crossing later at night, and it's insane. For about 20 seconds, it's just a huge whirlpool of people. During the first visit though, I took advantage of Shibuya Magnet, which is a mall right on the street corner and has a rooftop lounge that presents the optimal view of the crossing. The mall itself is pretty nice, with things like a gashapon shop, a one-piece store, a pretty big record store, and more. Fourth day in Tokyo, I went to Shinjuku, where I primarily took the opportunity to hit up Kabukicho, which is the district that inspired Kamurocho in the Like a Dragon video game series. And I gotta say, I already knew that Ryuga Gotoku Studio made a faithful recreation, but if you actually visit and see how well they did it in person, you can truly appreciate the accuracy. There were some spots where I felt like I was straight up sucked into the game. Anyway, I visited spots like the famous Arch, I saw the Godzilla head on the Toho Cinemas building, and I checked out Don Quixote. I also made a trip to the Godzilla store, located on the first floor of another mall. It was a small space in the corner of the building, but it had a lot of cool stuff. I was tempted to buy way more than what I actually walked away with. I briefly went back to my hotel to drop off the bag of Godzilla goodies I was hauling around and decided to go back to Akiba in the evening to check out Yodobashi Akiba, which is a gigantic electronics department store with several floors, including a food court right outside the first floor. This place has every piece of technology, every appliance, every gadget, every hobby you could possibly ever need. From power banks to laptops to toasters to TVs to golf clubs to trading cards to gunpla, it's crammed with an insane amount of stuff. I finished the day off by grabbing some donuts at a place called Jack in the Donuts, eating right outside on a bench and people watching for a while before returning to the hotel. Fifth day in Tokyo, I went back to Akiba once again to check out the Warhammer Cafe, which is a shop that sells a ton of miniatures and has a small eatery in the back. The manager of the place was really nice, and when I told him I've only ever read the novels and never actually played a game, he took me over to a demonstration table and played a quick game with me. Then I bought the Eisenhorn Omnibus and sat down for a couple meals while I read Fulgrim. It's a really neat store and it does have designated building areas that you can rent out. Then I checked out the 8th-floor Mandarake building. Then I went to Trader Headquarters, which is another big store with new and secondhand electronics and games, and once I was satisfied with that, I decided it was time to pay a visit to Unicorn Gundam over in Odaiba. And it was just as cool as you'd expect. It even regularly moves and lights up. I also checked out the Gundam-based store nearby and the aforementioned Diver City Mall right behind it. I've touched on malls a few times already, and I'm going to mention more of them, but if it isn't obvious already, malls in America might be dying, but they're alive and kicking in Tokyo. In fact, during peak hours when students are getting out of school and hanging out with friends before heading home, on top of the usual tourist activity, some malls, like Diver City, are so crammed with people that food courts are nearly as congested as the metro. Seriously, I had to squeeze my way through a bunch of people to leave Diver City and head back to my hotel. Day 6 in Tokyo was pretty brief because I spent a long portion of it just chilling in my hotel room, but I did leave for a bit to check out Todokan, an entirely pro-wrestling dedicated shop that is completely loaded with memorabilia. From PPV posters to VHS tapes to old issues of Puroresu magazine to old secondhand ticket stubs, this place had everything. It even has signed pictures of various wrestlers and even legitimate old wrestling gear worn by some of the most famous Japanese wrestlers of the past and today. If you like pro wrestling and you find yourself in Tokyo, do yourself a favor and hit up Todokan. After that, I went to Takadanobaba to check out Mikado Game Center, which is a true blue old school arcade. I'll go into more detail about it in my Akihabara video because I kinda might as well include it there with the other game centers. Day 7, I packed up my things, checked out of the hotel, and went to Tokyo Station to ride the Shinkansen over to Osaka. The ride was about 2.5 hours long, and sadly I did not sit at a window seat facing Mount Fuji. But since we're on the subject, let me just say that if you do plan to visit multiple cities during your trip like I did, I strongly recommend using the Shinkansen instead of domestic flights. Flights might be a bit faster, but the convenience of the Shinkansen cannot be overstated. Buying a ticket and boarding is literally just as easy as boarding a normal metro train. You don't need to buy tickets days ahead, you don't need to deal with check-in, you just show up at the station, get your tickets at the kiosk, and go. It's a great way to get around in Japan. Anyway, once I reach Osaka, I make a beeline to my hotel to dump my luggage because hotels in Japan apparently don't even attempt to try and check you in if you arrive early. So I just left my stuff there and went on about my business. Then I went over to the Edion Arena, where I watched my first ever in-person wrestling event, NJPW Power Struggle. I'll go into more detail about it in a separate video where I go over shows, events, and exhibits I visited. But this is the one event I paid for before I actually came to Japan, so this is the only real obligation of the trip. My second day in Osaka, I went out to Namba Station and immediately found Hiroba Square, an excellent place for relaxing and people watching. I would return to this spot numerous times throughout my week here. It's just an amazing little rest area where many people gather just to chill out. Then I made my way to Denden Town, which I will go into more detail about in a different video. At night, I hit up Dotonbori, specifically the bridges over the Dotonbori River. This is yet another place that fans of the Like a Dragon series will recognize, and it's another excellent place to just relax, either on the bridges themselves or at any of the numerous food places along the water. On the way back to my hotel, I stopped once more at Hiroba Square, which has a totally different but equally welcoming vibe at night. Day 3 in Osaka, I briefly returned to Denden Town and Dotonbori, then I check out Amerikamura, which is an area of Osaka that's heavily influenced by the States and is very, very fashion-centric. Clothes stores are all over the place here. New, old, expensive brands, cheap brands, everything. If you're a big thrifter, do yourself a favor and hit up Amerikamura in Osaka. You will find something to get. Only a stone's throw away from Triangle Park is a cluster of shops in the vague shape of a mall, but not really a mall. It's hard to explain. But I explored the structure a bit and visited a place called the Silver Ball Planet, which is a pinball arcade featuring machines old and new. I also stumbled upon a store that is entirely fighting game focused. That'll be part of my Akihabara and Denden Town video because it just fits with the theme. Fourth day in Osaka, I visited a building called Abeno Harukas. which is the tallest building in Osaka and has a department store, fancy restaurants and cafes, and most importantly, multiple observation decks at different floors. It also had an impressionist art exhibit going on, which I did attend, but I'll leave that for my video on shows, events, and exhibits. After it though, I had a coffee at the 16th floor cafe, but then I ventured further up to a 360-degree observation deck on the roof, which has an open-air cafe right below it, which also has a 360-degree view. That's where I bought a beer and planted myself on a chair facing right out the window. I spent over an hour there just sipping my Mino beer stout and enjoying the view. It's a simple pleasure, but a pleasure nonetheless. It seems like nothing, but it was one of my favorite moments of the trip. Day 5 in Osaka, I went to Shinsaibashi to check out 2 neighboring malls, Parco and Daimaru. Here, there were a ton of themed shops. There was a Dark Souls shop which had a statue of Siegmeyer and sold actual rings from the games. There was another Godzilla shop that had even more stuff than the Tokyo shop I visited. There was a Sega shop featuring Like a Dragon, Sonic, Persona, and Metaphor merch. There was an Ultraman shop, which was right next to the Capcom shop, which had Street Fighter, Resident Evil, Monster Hunter, Devil May Cry, and more. And there was the Pokemon Center, which was so horribly crammed with people that I was honestly turned off from buying anything, so I just took my pictures and left. Day 6 in Osaka, I made my way to Amerikamura once again, but on the way over to do something else that I wanted to do, I came across a skate show sponsored by DC Shoes Japan. It was a small setup where skaters were given a short staircase to trick over and a short rail to grind. It wasn't a long show, but it was pretty fun, and I had no idea it was going on before I stumbled into it. After watching for a bit, I went on to do what I was actually there to do: cuddle up with pigs at a micro pig cafe. They were adorable and really enjoyed chilling on people's laps. It was great. I booked an hour-long stay while everyone else who was there booked half an hour, so when all other visitors got up to leave at the same time, the pigs completely swarmed me because I was the only one left sitting. It was amusing not only to me, but to other patrons as well. I finished the day off by visiting a foreigner-owned gaming bar called Space Station. The owner of the place wasn't there, but according to the bartender who was, the owner is from Maryland, and it's a place that's mostly for the gaijin who want to hang out with other gaijin for a bit. It's a small place, but the vibe is really nice, and the cocktails were solid. I had a Danky Kang and Dr. Mario. Day 7 in Osaka, I went to hit up 2 spots right next to each other: the Tempozan Ferris wheel, which is one of the tallest Ferris wheels in the world, and Kaiyukan, the Osaka Aquarium. The Ferris wheel was great. It lasts 15 minutes, which gives more than enough time for pictures and appreciation of the excellent view of Osaka Bay. Kaiyukan, though, was really special. I feel like I made the right choice in going in the early evening, because the entire group of people I went with through the aquarium were mostly adults, so it was a pretty chill and quiet experience. I'll go into a little bit more detail in another video. Day 8 in Osaka was the day I left. I got up early, packed my things, which was getting increasingly difficult to do because I'm a light traveler who doesn't do checked bags, meaning I only had the space offered by a carry-on and a personal item, and went back to Tokyo. I haven't spoken much of my hotels yet in this video because they haven't been anything special, though they were pretty nice. But this third hotel had an amazing location. It was pretty out of the way, several kilometers south of the center of the city, but it was literally only 30 steps from the nearest metro station, and it's directly attached to a 7-Eleven. There's also a Lawson across the street and a Family Mart around the corner, and a cafe across the other street for a good breakfast and coffee in the morning. If you're interested in such a hotel and don't mind that it's a little out of the way, look up the Appa Hotel Omori Ekimae. It was by far the best of the 3 hotels I stayed at. Anyway, the first night back at Tokyo, I decided to hit up Shibuya and see what it was like after the sun went down. And man, everything you might have heard is true. Absolutely, it gets busier at night, regardless of it being a school or work night. People fill the streets and all the buildings are lit up to an almost absurd degree. I specifically went to the Parco Mall here to check out the Death Stranding pop-up store, which was sadly already ransacked and had about a third of the merchandise left. I didn't see the exhibit in the basement area because I didn't want to stay for too long. Day 2 in my return to Tokyo, I visited Mori Tower, which had 2 points of interest for me. The art museum, which had a great exhibit that I will go into in another video, and the observation deck. I looked up the various observation decks Tokyo had because there's several notable ones, and I landed on Mori Tower because I wanted to go there for the museum anyway, so I might as well kill 2 birds with 1 stone. And I think I made the correct decision because the deck is great. It offers a 360-degree view of the city, and the windows are clean and you can sit right up against them, no problem. The deck was also hosting an exhibit dedicated to the Japanese band Spitz, so I heard their song Beautiful Finn being played on a loop the entire time I was up there. So now I associate the deck with that tune and it pops into my head when I hear it. But my day still isn't over. I had one more place to go, a snake cafe. Yeah, you heard right, snakes. I was able to get up close and personal with a corn snake and a ball python, and it was awesome. Day 3 in Tokyo Part 2, I ran into a bit of a crisis. I woke up with a notification on my phone saying that my checking account balance was at -$1. I fucked up. I spent way more money on souvenirs than I thought I would, and I was not paying attention to my finances. But it's okay. I have hundreds of dollars of backup money that I could transfer over, but it was gonna take a business day to accomplish, so I spent the day cooped up in my hotel. This actually is not as bad as it sounds, because I honestly kinda wanted a day of rest because I've been out and about pretty much the entire time I've been in Japan. My feet and legs were screaming for an off day, so I gave it to them. And I used the cash that I had on me to live off konbini food, which is really easy to do because it's cheap and surprisingly filling. Day 4, things were back in gear. This day was entirely made up of shows and exhibits, so I'm going to save the bulk of it for a later video. But to give a quick rundown, I started my day by visiting the Tokyo Museum of Emerging Science and Innovation, aka Miraicon. Then I checked out Team Lab Planets and finished my day with a badass metal show of local Tokyo bands. Again, I'll go into detail in another video, so keep an eye out for it. 5th day at Tokyo Part 2, I went to Akiba yet again to visit some places I hadn't yet checked out, including another retro game store, which, again, I will save for my video dedicated to Akiba, Denden Town, and related activities. Day 6, I went back to Shinjuku and back to the Toho Cinemas building with the Godzilla head, but this time to actually sit down and watch a movie. I saw Gladiator 2 in MX 4D, which is the gimmick theater experience where the seats shake during action sequences and spray air and water onto you and whatnot. I've never actually done a 4D screening of a movie before, so it was a fun little experience, but probably not something I would do for every movie I saw. As for the movie itself, it was okay. Story-wise, it was honestly just a great value version of the first film, but what really held the movie up was the collective performances of the cast, and the action. After that, I visited a dog cafe called Rio. This is actually my second dog cafe of the trip, but I didn't mention the first one, called Micro Teacup Cafe, which was during my first day in Akiba because I forgot to take pictures of my time there. Big blunder, I know. But honestly, I prefer that first dog cafe over the second one because even though the second one has more dogs and a greater variety of breeds, the dogs are way too food trained. They will completely ignore you if you don't have any food, and if you do, they'll stick around for about 10 seconds and not even let you touch them until you distract them with food for a moment, and then they go off to another customer to repeat the process. Basically, you have to compete with other customers for their attention, and in the first dog cafe I went to, this was not an issue. The dogs there were completely okay with just waltzing up to me and laying on my lap the entire 30 minutes, even though I didn't have any food on me at all. So if you actually want to directly interact and pet the dogs the whole time, go to Micro Teacup Cafe. But if you're fine with just sitting around and watching the dogs instead, you'll be fine with Rio. I finished my day by visiting a bar in Shibuya called Lost. One or two of you might be familiar with it because it's the bar opened by fellow and much bigger YouTuber Chris Broad, also known as Abroad in Japan. I went in and it was actually packed. I had to stand and wait a solid 15 minutes or so before a bar seat opened up. But when it did, I went to town. I ordered 2 cocktails, 1 alcoholic and 1 non-alcoholic, and I got the cheese plate, which was delicious. But the most important part of my visit to Lost is that I made a friend, a photographer named Neil. He noticed my Final Fantasy tattoo on my right arm, to which he showed me his own Final Fantasy tattoo on the exact same place. And we ended up talking for about 3 hours. It was great to finally make a vacation buddy before I left. So shout out to Neil. Day 6 I went to Tokyo Station, but not to ride the Shinkansen again. Instead, I went to the basement level where there's a ton of different stores. I checked out the Hololive official shop, but there was a line so I didn't go in. Probably for the best because I bought a bunch of Hololive stuff from different places already. I went to the Kirby Cafe though, and the Kamen Rider store. After that, I went to Akiba yet again, which means more content to talk about in the Akiba video, but this time I went to a Gundam shop that I didn't even know existed until I simply looked up and saw its sign on the building. It ended up being a really cool little shop. I did a few other things before calling it a night and preparing for the final stretch of the trip. Day 7 and my last full day, I decided to finally visit a temple. Specifically, I visited Zojoji. I had been avoiding temples and castles so far because I had assumed they would be too swarmed with tourists to even be enjoyable, but I was wrong. Zojoji was actually pretty empty when I first got there, and a handful of people started trickling in. The inside of the temple was gorgeous and entrancing. The smell of incense was quite strong. A lot of tourists poked their head in, took a couple pictures, and left, but I ended up sitting inside for over an hour and a half. It really was a space that was conducive to just sitting and thinking. I loved it. Day 7 and the day of my departure, I decided to make a last-minute visit to the Tamashi Nation store that's right there when you exit Akihabara Station. I also went to take a picture of the Onoden, Laux, and Edion stores, because apparently this group of buildings is going to get torn down in the near future for a new building, so I decided to get close and snap a pic just for posterity. After that, I tried to score a nap at an internet cafe before my flight, but it turns out I need my passport on me in order to do that, which their webpage did not state, and I left my passport back at the hotel for temporary storage, and I wasn't gonna do an hour and 20-minute round trip just for a 1-hour nap, so I said fuck it and basically sat in a nearby McDonald's for nearly 2 hours. Then I picked up my luggage, took the metro to Haneda Airport, which really fucking sucked. Being in a crowded train is one thing, but being in a crowded train where half the crowding is caused by luggage is even worse. So next time, I'm probably taking a taxi to Terminal 3. After arriving at the airport, I boarded the plane, and thanks to my clever use of the United app, I was able to keep an eye on my seating and change to a spot where I had the whole row to myself. It was a very comfortable 9 hours, way better than the flight coming over. And that's basically it. My 3 weeks of Japan are over. Some of you might have noticed something missing here. Throughout this entire video, I failed to mention one crucial aspect of my trip that there's no way I could have avoided because it's necessary for me to live: food. I never mentioned food at all, and that's on purpose because that will also be its own video. So yeah, I have multiple videos planned about my trip to Japan. This one was meant to be an overview to give everyone an idea of what I did. And this leads me to the final talking point. How much did I enjoy it? Well, I enjoyed it a lot. I enjoyed it so much, I started to feel the ache of leaving the day before I actually left. The trip surpassed my expectations. I mentioned at the start of the video that I'm a country person, and I'm surrounded by miles of desert to the point where I need to drive to my own mailbox. I've always lived like this. I always told myself that I couldn't be a city person, but I said that without actually experiencing some city living on my own, and this trip gave me a tiny taste. I always assumed I wouldn't be able to stand living in a city because, oh, the hustle and bustle would just be too much. But this trip has me seriously reconsidering that. By going to Tokyo, I finally got first-hand experience as to why it's so nice to have an actually walkable city where most things you need are likely within a half-kilometer of your home or apartment. A city where public transportation is not only plentiful, but reliable and cheap to the point where owning a vehicle is probably straight up pointless for most people. Obviously, Tokyo and Japan in general is not perfect. They of course have their own share of issues, like toxic work culture and black companies, dwindling population, an increase of abandoned homes in rural areas, and tourism is not only higher than ever, but apparently the government wants it to be even higher. But man, I just really enjoyed being there more than I thought I would. I thought I would enjoy Tokyo and Osaka in spite of their size and density, but I'm starting to understand that I enjoyed those aspects too in a certain way. So that's how much I enjoyed this trip. I enjoyed it to the point where it's kinda sending me into a crisis where I'm second guessing how I thought I always wanted my ideal lifestyle to be like. I'm already looking at photos I took during the trip and feeling that pang of longing as if I'm looking at something that happened a lifetime ago, but no, it only happened last week. Also, some of you might be wondering how much this entire trip cost. Well, if we include the round-trip flight tickets, the hotels, the food budget, and the Shinkansen tickets, but exclude the paid activities and souvenirs because it's not like you're going to visit the same exhibits and buy the same things, then the cost of 3 weeks in Japan across 2 cities for a solo traveler from America was somewhere around $4,500, which isn't too bad, especially considering all the ways I could have saved money. Now, it probably goes without saying, but I'm already planning on going to Japan again. I don't know when, and I don't know if I'll be solo again. I hope not, because I'm trying to convince friends to go with me. Regardless, I would say that a second trip is definitely an inevitability. This concludes the overview of my 2024 Japan trip. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.